Ladies and gentlemen, I did a video yesterday. The Quran is man-made, not divine. And I received quite a few comments from a lot of people on there, including Muslims. Some a little bit triggered, you could tell by the response, very defensive. Others were very much looking forward to the series that I'm going to produce to try and show myths and legends that the Quran is borrowing or in some ways inspired by and works in its own way. This is a very important aspect of what MythVision does. I applied the same criticism to Christianity, and of course, apologists have been critical back for many years. I'm going to do that here with the Quran. So first, I want to say thank you to those Muslims who are actually open to a series that might look to their holy book and show, hey, this actually seems to lift from stories that your neighbors already had. This seems to be lifting from well-known Christian or Jewish sources. And if that's the case, fundamentally, the question that should arise is it also a myth? Is it also a legend that Muhammad was in a cave and the angel Gabriel gave him this material? Accusations of Muhammad being illiterate is proof somehow to them that he could not have lifted stories from hearsay. And what's unfortunate about the Muslim commenters that have done that have said, he was illiterate, you idiot, these lies about the prophet that you're going to bring up showing that he's using myths and whatnot, that's all false and debunked because he's illiterate talking to an illiterate people. My friend, there are receipts of people actually doing transactions and there is writing in Arabia. It's not like they're a bunch of cavemen. Do you understand how this makes people in Arabia look? I mean, you're fighting my people were ignorant more and more, and it's not a good look. In fact, the evidence, epigraphic evidence, suggests that they were able to write poetry. In fact, that is why in the Quran they say, produce another book like it. They are, in a sense, saying, you could write too, so make one better. That means people were literate at the time. Yeah, literacy wasn't universal, but to suggest that they weren't literate as evidence that Muhammad could not have borrowed these stories is absurd. I even have one commenter suggest that the Alexander Romance was written after the Quran. I've never heard anything, it's going to sound insulting, but I'm just being honest. I've never heard a more dumb answer. The Alexander Romance goes all the way back to Pseudo-Callisthenes. This literally is like 3rd century BCE. It was translated into Latin, into Syriac eventually in the 3rd, 4th century of the Common Era. That's 300 years before your prophet. And it was very popular in the neck of the woods where the prophet was born and raised in Arabia. This was worldwide. The Alexander Romance was a very popular thing. So we will cover that when we get to Dhul-Qarnayn. I had accusations that, well, you don't speak Arabic and you don't know Arabic and therefore you have no way to criticize or know what the actual Arabic says. Listen, I don't speak Arabic, but neither do 90% of Muslims in the world, probably more. So maybe we should just make the Quran exclusively something that only Arabic-speaking countries can have. Stop with the dawah and trying to push these English conversations with people. They must learn Arabic first. So unless you're going to actually teach them Arabic, oh, and also they need to make sure they're going with the right translator and interpreter. Because obviously all English translations have failed, so why have translations? Stop with the translations. The other thing is the tafsir, the debates on the meaning of words that academics can't agree on till this day. And, there's an argument of every jot and tittle is perfect and from God, and it's kind of like, when did this theology develop? I wonder if all medieval Muslims that were highly educated thought the same way that modern Muslim fundamentalists do. I doubt that they were all like this. And so I would encourage more Muslims to get educated on this and move toward maybe what some of the more medieval Muslim scholars that were advanced in thinking and stuff thought about their tradition. That's my personal thought. Let's see, what else? Oh, produce a surah like this, right? Is a challenge that, you can't produce if there's nothing that can be produced like the Quran. That is one of the silliest things for me. It's like produce a better Lord of the Rings or, produce a better The Hobbit or you name it, Star Wars. And if you don't produce it better than the original guy, well, then that original Star Wars is divine and therefore proof. I don't know how. It reminds me of when Bart Ehrman was interviewed by Muhammad Hijab, and Muhammad Hijab said that a divine book from God will have no contradictions. And he's like, that doesn't prove that a divine book from God would have no contradictions, because the phone book doesn't contradict itself, and therefore you could argue that that's a divine book. There's no contradictions in the phone book. Anyway, it's just a funny thing. Like it's a subjective, like, I already cherish this, make a better one than this. It's what it sounds like. It's not even an argument. It's like, you think it's an argument. It doesn't sound like an argument from the outside. From the outside, from people like me, I hear that and I'm like, so you value that. I'll give you an example. I'll listen to a song on YouTube that I really like. It sounds amazing. And I'll look at the dislikes and see thousands of dislikes and think to myself, how in the world can that many people dislike this song? This song is so good. And I don't know if anyone will produce a better version of this song. Therefore, it's God. Therefore, it's proof. It's not an argument. It's a, I'm going to show you and test you. And the other thing is, in Surah 21:5, it records them saying that Muhammad's words were confused dreams or that he was but a poet. So there were accusations then that he was a poet. Back to my point about Muhammad being illiterate and the people being illiterate, in the Qur'an itself, let me see if I can find the surah here. It actually talks about him possibly learning from Jews and Christians. There were people who were literally arguing this. So let's see. It says in Surah 16:103, we know they say it's only a human who teaches him. Someone's teaching Muhammad according to the Qur'an. It's accusations are saying this. Now, you may not agree with it, but the fact that they had to say this, right? It's controversial. So it says, the tongue of the one they refer to is foreign, but this Qur'an is in clear Arabic, as if that's evidence. So they say it's only a human who teaches him, but the tongue of the one they refer to is a foreigner. It's foreign tongue, but the Qur'an is in clear Arabic. Think about that for a second. This verse literally is like damage control, ladies and gentlemen. Muhammad's own contemporaries, the people who actually knew him, thought he was learning these stories from Jews and Christians. The Qur'an kind of self-confesses this. Over and over, you get these little indicators that go, hold on, there were people at that time who thought that, and the Qur'an says that much. So you might favor with the Qur'an as you already believe. I'm going to trust that it isn't that. And why would it say that? Well, because it's wanting to tell you that these accusations are here and we're not going with those accusations. They're selling you a divine message. It's the same thing when you go to Joseph Smith. Now, a Mormon might be watching this and go, you're touching my area. I disagree. And they'll become apologists. And then you Muslims can listen to them and go, man, this guy's warped in his thinking. He clearly doesn't get that, Joseph Smith is a false prophet. And Joseph Smith, lied about the golden plates. And Joseph Smith is this, that. And there were accusations over and over, contemporaries who said Joseph Smith is fabricating this stuff, that they're inventing, lies about all this material, and that the angel Moroni and the golden tablets and him looking in a seer stone in a hat and all this fun stuff, right, that we know. There's also the book that pertains to Abraham that was like a mummy text that Egyptologists have shown like has nothing to do with Abraham. So what I'm getting at is you would be quick to criticize that, and you'd probably listen to the contemporary voices that condemn or show that Muhammad is actually, not Muhammad, but Joseph Smith is making stuff up. So why is that not the same for someone like me who's not convinced of the Quran after reading it and not going, this is divine, this is clearly from God? I'm listening to these voices. They're coming out of the Quran itself. And it's pretty wild. So let's see what other comments I got up here. Let's see, the Smoking Gun Dhul-Qarnayn. We're going to talk about that. Yeah, and we're going to go deep into this series and actually go through each of these scholarly sources, primary sources. Let's read the original text in a translation. I cannot read Arabic, but I am going to be working off scholarly translations and stuff. I'm trying to think of this whole idea that, every time I hear Muslims bring up stuff like this, you got to understand how self-defeating a lot of these arguments sound to me. And no wonder the Christians are having a heyday criticizing and being able to like pick apart some of this stuff. Look, I've been doing this for a long time with Christianity, as you know, and I'm friends with many of the Christian apologists, and we just disagree on these things. But I have not spent a lot of time dissecting the Quran, which literally is carrying the torch of Jewish and Christian thought, also adding in Zoroastrianism and other Persian, potentially even Arab ideas that, make it a spin-off, a modern spin-off version. I think one of the silliest things to me is when, there's a lot of silly things, but like one of the silliest things to me is when they say stuff like, the Quran, we agree that the Christians and Jews had divine word of God, but it got corrupted. So when it's not the same with the Quran, like take, for example, some of the stuff we're going to get into with the birds from clay, the infancy gospel of Thomas and stuff with Jesus as an infant, turning clay birds into living birds or talking from the cradle, or, you list it. If there's stories in the Quran that don't line up with Christian teachings, they'll just say, well, the Christians were wrong and they got corrupted, and the ones we have are the accurate correction of that. It's almost the same thing what Joseph Smith, as I brought up earlier, does with Christianity. Oh, they misinterpreted it. They don't understand, and they've corrupted the true teaching of Jesus or the true teaching of God. So you have to trust this much later guy who has additional material, like the Quran is an additional text, a sacred book for these people. And I'm reading it and I'm going, okay, so once the Quran lines up with the Bible, Old Testament or New Testament, then, okay, cool. We're good. This confirms that the Quran is just true because it actually has these facts correct. When it changes, that's where the Jews and Christians are all wrong. And they've corrupted their text. And our later material is correct. It blows me away personally to think that doesn't stop someone from going, hold on, this was developed like 600-700 years after New Testament material, and at least 800-900 to 1,000 years after biblical Old Testament material, the Hebrew Bible. And I'm sitting here trying to scratch my head going, how can someone not see that much later material would not have this much earlier observation when contemporary Jewish authors or Christian authors from that period would be closer to the events of that material or the closer to that material's writings? It just seems more likely for error from original context when time passes by. Like the telephone game, it's kind of like that. I get it. Sometimes you can preserve, really good preservation. Scribes did this with Jewish writings. Christians attempted to do it with their writings. I mean, I get that there's scribal preservation, but the Quran does pop up out of the blue here in the 7th century, developed from these ideas. And I know that Muslims see, there's continuity with Jewish and Christian thought. I get that. But what about when there's continuity in your Quran? You're supposed to believe there were sleepers in the cave. You're supposed to believe that that's history. Like, you think that happened, right? But this legend comes from an early Christian legend that did not happen. So we have no reason to think the sleepers of Ephesus is history. And in fact, Christians themselves saw that and said, hey, cool, wonderful story. They were telling folktales. These are legends. They're making up interesting stories about the current pagan world that they were living in that was being converted by Christianity, or they were attempting to convert to Christians. Okay? So here you are later and you think that happened, but it's definitely lifting off of a trope, by the way, that goes back to the ancient Greek world where a man walks his dog. We're going to cover this in depth, to a cave and then goes to sleep and wakes up like 57 years later in the cave of Zeus. And like there's a whole bunch of material behind this. So to me, these are defeaters on historicity. These are defeaters on questioning the validity of this actually happening. And this would be a strong defeater to me on what's more probable. Accusations in the Quran say that he's learning this stuff from people, but because that other guy spoke a different language, he couldn't have learned the material? or a real angel in a cave is dictating the material. He's illiterate, so he has to now speak it, and then it's only decades later that we finally produce a Quran that supposedly preserves the exact words of the prophet. I mean, if you're coming from the outside, you're not already drinking the Kool-Aid, it's pretty obvious. So I want to do this series for anyone who's never really taken this stuff and considered this material seriously. I just figure I'd address a few criticisms with my video today, and I've got to go record a podcast and all that kind of stuff. Also, Richard Carrier will be here at the house in 5 to 6 days. I'm going to be recording with him. Patreon supporters who financially support MythVision, if you haven't joined today, ask your question before he is here and gone. And you'll have your own video asking your own question to Dr. Richard Carrier. I'm taking one question per Patreon member. I plan to do the same thing when Dennis McDonald comes down, and I'd like to do this with other academics as well. But, help support us so we can continue this endeavor and bring you critical thought. I sincerely appreciate everyone, and including especially Muslims who are mature enough to really hear the criticisms. You may not agree. You may disagree. You may not like what I'm saying, and I get it. I would not like what I'm saying when I was a Christian, but if you are able to listen, cool. The final accusation, or the final thing I'd like to address, is they act like if you don't debate, if you don't get into an arena and yell at the other guy and overspeak the other person, that somehow your arguments aren't valid. Ladies and gentlemen, debating may be one method to try and prove and hash out your ideals to see if they stand worthy to contest against other ideas. Not everyone is a rhetorician. Not everyone can be a sophist on the spot. Not everyone needs to sit there and make the anxiety and all the pressure that be, sit there and argue on the spot, trying to find logical loopholes and gotchas on your opponent to make them look bad, to somehow, haha, I got you, we won. Like, I get it. It's not my style to sit here and put myself through that kind of pressure, to sit here and on the spot argue and yell at another person, likely a man. I'm not interested. It's not my kind of thing. I am glad that scientists in labs aren't just sitting there yelling with test tubes at each other and seeing whoever sounded best. Therefore, we got closer to what the scientific evidence and facts are, because Joe out-argued Bob, but Joe might be full of shit. And Bob might be actually factual, and his science might actually be closer to the truth. This is sword fights through words, and it's fun. It's entertaining. But it does not get you to the facts. You have to research and actually digest the material and argue your own way. Some of us don't prefer to do that method, and some of us do. So to argue that I must get into a ring and argue with people, I'm happy to have conversations with people, respectful ones. But it is often a huge dick measuring contest when debates are taking place, especially in the Muslim Christian world, I've noticed. So I prefer to let you read, listen, study, consider the arguments I bring forward and say, actually, he's got a point. Or here's where I see your holes and I'm not convinced by them. There are other comments that came that were so dumb. I don't even know, worthy of expressing, but these people who are commenting clearly don't know how literature operates, how materials are passed along and literally adapt and evolve and change in new cultures and stuff. So when you argue about antecedents, mythic, legendary tropes, and their influences on later material, they act like, because there's similarities. Yeah, there's a lot to consider here, and these are experts in the field that are looking at the Quran and saying, yeah, this is clearly lifting from this. Why do you need an angel in a cave when your neighbors already are spouting these narratives? So I'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for sticking around this far. Stay tuned, because I will likely be responding to more nonsense when I hear it. And I will also be giving shout outs to positive people who are in the chat that are actually encouraging. Thanks a lot, everybody. And never, ever forget, we are MythVision.